I'm Grant Walker. Welcome to Last Call for Thursday the 30th of July. I'll be back with Heads Up Friday, 10 a.m. To the TPP and drugs, New Zealand generic drug maker Douglas Pharmaceuticals warns that while patents are a concern with the TPP, there are worse fishhooks that aren't getting any press, namely provisions around data exclusivity and patent linkage. Prime Minister John Key has finally conceded the TPP agreement will likely mean more expensive drugs, although taxpayers rather than patients directly will absorb the cost, as Crown agency Pharmac pays more to big US pharmaceutical companies. Douglas Pharmaceuticals' in-house intellectual property counsel, Lynette Stanton, says her company expects the TPP will extend the patent period or at least make it easier for large drug companies to gain extensions. New Zealand currently has a flat 20-year patent period. Most countries have a 20-year period plus a provision for 5-year extensions. TPP negotiations are secret. The trade deal's formula for calculating patent terms has not been made public, but Big Pharma has been lobbying hard for a more favourable formula for calculating patent periods and extensions, which can be granted if a company successfully argues it needs more time to recoup the development costs of a drug. A complication is that the patent clock starts ticking as soon as a patent is granted, but it can be many years after that point before a drug reaches the market. Ms. Stanton says her company, which has been making cheaper generic versions of drugs since 1967, is well braced for the TPP. After all, the controversial trade treaty has been under negotiation since 2005, and Douglas is hoping for a 5-year lead-in time for the new provisions once the TPP is finally signed. With some adjustment to its timing and judicious choice of which drugs to copy, Douglas should continue to prosper. But although Douglas will be okay, Pharmac will definitely pay more, or at least pay more for longer, she says. The lawyer also notes that Pharmac does not cover or subsidise all drugs, especially for those with rarer conditions, meaning some patients will take a direct hit in the pocket. Although the patent issue has got all the press, Ms. Stanton says of equal or greater concern is the TPP's provisions around data exclusivity and what's called patent linkage. Data exclusivity is the period that Big Pharma can keep information about a drug to itself. Ms. Stanton says the data is crucial because generic drug makers need it to verify their versions of a drug are behaving in the right manner under various parameters. For that, they need access to testing notes and other data collated during the brand name drug's development. Big Pharma is lobbying for the TPP to extend the data exclusivity period, or the point from which a generic drug maker can register to apply for access to data, from 5 years to 12 years. To the rich list and Sir Douglas Myers. Former brewer and expatriate businessman Sir Douglas Myers says he's just had his best year ever in business. In an update for his 2015 NBR Rich List entry, he says he's had the best business performance of my life in 2 ventures. Downtown Publishing, a New York music business, has expanded to London, Sir Douglas's home base, through the acquisition of Eagle Eye Music. Its co-founder and managing director Robert Neary will run Downtown UK. Sir Douglas says British songwriters and composers provide 1 in every 5 tracks streamed on Spotify, and Downtown UK owns the Deep Purple catalogue. Sir Douglas' other business is a global clinical research organisation, Chiltern International, which was founded in 1982 in England and has since expanded to 4 offices in the US as well as ones in Australia, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Singapore, Taiwan and India. It provides clinical services to biotechnology, medical device and pharmaceutical companies. Sir Douglas retains a keen interest in politics, both in the UK and in New Zealand. He says many commentators here, meaning the UK, are articulating the possible end for the Labour Party, which, as in New Zealand, is union-controlled and has run out of steam. Other than throwing other people's cash at problems, it has nothing to offer those wanting to get ahead. Voters, to Labour's surprise, are more interested in the party that can provide a good environment than pulling the successful down. He says Prime Minister John Key's greatest contribution is to provide stability and optimism for New Zealanders. Mr Myers says the economy is still dependent on the same sort of products, not so much sophistication in processing, branding and marketing, but at least New Zealand does see itself as vitally connected with the rest of the world. It's also confident in sport and take on the best and cope maturely with not necessarily winning everything. To the advertising industry, 8 months after selling 3/4 of his business to a global advertising agency, Heyday founder and managing director Luke Pearson says the agency has maintained its culture. As reported by NBR Radio yesterday, WPP subsidiary JWT, also partly owned by ASX-listed STW Group, acquired 75% of the shares of Wellington-based digital advertising agency Heyday. Accounts filed in the company's office say this cost $2.5 million, but 2 additional payments totaling $1.47 million will be paid in 2018 and 2020. Mr. Pearson, an EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, says the partnership with JWT wasn't spontaneous, with both agencies working together on mutual clients such as Z Energy for a few years. He said, with anything like this, it can go one of two ways, and we've seen what happens when these things go wrong, and ours has been the opposite of that. We've been able to retain the independent heart of Heyday, but bolster it with a leadership peer group, a large network, and intellectual property. He said the things we were scared about were cultural change and mass organisation change, but they haven't happened. What we've ended up with is much more support and stability. The agency now has 40 employees, up from 35 at the time of the acquisition, including a new hire and client service director, Viv Bartman, this month. She was previously general manager of user experience design firm Optimal Experience. Mr. Pearson said the growth has been quite controlled. We're trying quite hard not to go ballistic and double in size in the next 12 months. Heyday also won Wellington Zoo's digital advertising account earlier in the year. The zoo spent $238,000 on advertising for 2014, according to its latest annual report. Heyday also recently won a joint project from ACC and the New Zealand Transport Agency for a new digital driver education program, which Mr. Pearson says was a highly competitive and public pitch. The former Double Click creative director wouldn't comment on revenue, but an announcement to the London Stock Exchange at the time of the acquisition says the 15-year-old agency has more than $4 million in revenue. Mr. Pearson says JWT and Heyday have a collaborative relationship, with Heyday being able to do work JWT wasn't able to in the past. He said, we can bring things to JWT that they can't do, and they do the same for us. JWT is focused on the creative and advertising communications. We're focused on big digital properties. He says JWT hasn't lost any staff after bringing Heyday on board.
NBR Radio with Bayleys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
Thursday, the 30th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson. This is NBR Radio. Welcome to Media Matters. With me, Nick Grant. Nick, the 10th of August, the D-Day for Story. This is the replacement to what was Campbell Live.
Indeed, and yeah, we'll get to see what the story is with Story. There have been assurances that it won't be light and fluffy, but there'll be a bit more of an entertainment focus than had been the case with Campbell Live. I feel a great deal of sympathy for everyone involved in that show, because they've had a very short period of time in which to get it up. And, it's going to be judged,
instantly.
Instantly and harshly. And certainly Mark Weldon, when he was talking about it earlier, though he hasn't iterated these comments, so they may have changed their mind. One can only hope they have. He said it was going to be reviewed before Christmas, which is no time whatsoever for a new show to get up, get some traction, and kind of feel their way around. And so yeah, good luck to them, I say. Also, in related kind of, what's replacing Campbell Live News, Story, of course, is only going to be 4 nights a week, Monday to Thursday, and in the 7 o'clock slot on Fridays, it was promised there was going to be an entertainment show, which is, not a bad idea, because it fits in with their very successful entertainment comedy lineup on Fridays, which they established years ago.
7 days and so forth.
7 days, and Graham Norton, when they've got a new season of that and so on. So in that 7 o'clock slot, Fridays is Lip Sync Battle, which I guess is a fairly self-evident title. It's various celebrities lip-syncing to songs, in some form of musical combat.
I mean, I'm not really into this kind of stuff anyway, but I find that the format of Lip Sync Battle incredibly repetitive. It doesn't really hook you into wanting to see it week after week.
Yeah, I've seen very little of it, actually, which probably makes me feel slightly better about it. But yeah, I think you're right. Half an hour. Every week, it might be too much.
And they're all sort of celebrities that you've never heard of half the time anyway. So
we'll see how that goes for them. But,
now, what about MasterChef? Yeah,
MasterChef launched on TV3 this week, and it does appear that the audience's appetite for warmed-over, formats is declining rapidly to kind of mix culinary metaphors. It rated just under 160,000 people, which is kind of catastrophic. And bear in mind that that's actually kind of a meaningless measure, because that's everyone aged +5 and up. So the really meaningful demo to look at is people aged 24 to 54, I believe, is what TV3 is hunting for. So I mean, that would have been lower again. I hesitate to call a catastrophic start to the season, but it's not a good sign, and it does kind of indicate what we've been saying for a while, and international reports such that audiences are going off the boil when it comes to reality shows.
No pun intended.
It was actually
cooking shows, but the other, I suppose, part of this too is that Come Dine With Me, which of course has been the filler program for Campbell Live, also hasn't really been particularly strong, has it?
No, but I think that's suffered the same kind of problems that one envisages Story having, as they had, they rushed it to screen. It had been scheduled to screen early next year, as I understand it, and so they were still advertising for people to appear on the show as contestants while it was screening already. So, that's that whole thing of, laying the railway tracks as the train comes towards you. It can't be, it's clearly not the most optimum circumstances in which to be making a show. And that's a shame because, God, it's hardly challenging viewing, but, I think that kind of programming has a place, and it can be entertaining. Certainly, the stuff that I've seen of the English version, it has a nice, quiet charm to it.
It's all about the way you pick the characters, though, isn't it? The individuals.
Though, having said that, it has got some fairly good coverage from the Spin-Off website, which is a very good website. It's all TV all the time. It has some great writers on it, and there are fans there. So I guess it's worth a look on that basis.
All right, and New Zealand On Air making some funding announcements as well too.
That's right. They've made some drama and documentary announcements, and interestingly enough, the head of New Zealand On Air, Jane Wrightson, took the opportunity when releasing these funding decisions to hose down some speculation that the soap that MediaWorks has ambitions to get up was applying for funding. And Ms. Wrightson says that actually New Zealand On Air has yet to receive a funding application. And my understanding is that show is still in development. I also understand that it's intended for the 5:30 slot, which is something TV3 really needs a strong 5:30 lead into their news. And this is one of the things that was really puzzling about the Campbell Live decision, is that it's been clear for ever and a day that TV3's evening news programming issues and rating issues starts at 5:30. They did have a strong lead-in the form of Home and Away for several years, but they lost that when they went into receivership, and TVNZ swooped in and stole it back from them. That program delivered a very strong audience to the 6 o'clock bulletin, which was pulled through 7 and on into the schedule, so the theory goes. But since they lost that, they've really been struggling at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and so on. And so, I was always puzzled by why there was this focus on 7 o'clock when actually, they really needed to address the issue at 5:30 first, I thought.
I see included in the funding projects Gloria Vale Project 3, which was really interesting because Campbell Live was probably on the verge of cracking something with that story. Unfortunately, the timing prevented that, but maybe the follow-on or the documentary that's being proposed here might be able to pick up on some of that ground. Yeah,
one can only hope, and I don't know if people who are working with Campbell Live on their series of items on that have plugged into this production or not, but that's one to look out for. There are some interesting things that they've been funding. West Side 2, which was the West Side was the prequel to Outrageous Fortune,
which has been good.
Yeah,
it's been very popular too.
And you'll be glad to know that that's got another 10 episodes. And also, one that I'm kind of particularly excited about, and I imagine would interest NBR listeners as well, is a show called Dirty Laundry, where the basic setup is a middle-class family whose mother is jailed for money laundering. They're challenged with trying to keep her business interests going in order to sustain their lifestyle. Now, this comes from Rachel Lang, who was who came up with the idea for Outrageous Fortune, which was which kind of had the reverse thing with the criminal husband goes into jail and the wife decides to go straight to keep the family together. This is kind of like a topical upmarket version of that, I suspect. And interestingly enough, this is from a new production company, which it's their second major drama series to be funded before even their first one reaches the air. The first one's called Filthy Rich, and that's essentially, and I hope I'm not doing it a disservice, I think it's kind of like a smarter, updated version of Gloss. I get the impression.
Right.
The lifestyles of the rich and awful. So the creators for that are Gavin Strawn, Rachel Lang, who have a huge track record in New Zealand drama, but this is their own company which they've created with Stephen Zanowski, who's the producer. I'm expecting great things from this production company.
Calling themselves appropriate enough Filthy Productions.
Indeed.
Nice name.
Yeah, promising. Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks for joining us, Nick Grant and Media Matters on NBR Radio.
NBR. With a National Business Review smartphone subscription, you can read or listen to the latest from NBR online. And for a limited time, it's free. Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today and get free smartphone access to NBR online until August 31st. NBR doesn't do sport, weather or horoscopes, just timely, relevant, useful and insightful business news. So for business news you can use for free, visit nbr.co.nz/free.
To the US, in an already crowded field of 16 other wannabes, a former governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore, is seeking the Republican nomination for next year's presidential election. He's the latest to file his candidacy with the US Federal Election Commission. Mr. Gilmore, 65, was Virginia's governor from 1998 to 2002. He's a former Army intelligence specialist, attorney, prosecutor, and Virginia Attorney General. He's been chairman of the Republican National Committee and was briefly a candidate for president in the 2008 election. Mr. Gilmore hasn't made any public statement about his candidacy, but is planning a public launch of his campaign next week, ahead of the first TV debate among the Republican candidates. He told a local newspaper earlier this month, "I bring to the table experience that others don't have." Debates on the Fox News channel will be restricted to the top 10 polling candidates, but those on CNN will involve all of them. To the Rich List and our ranking methods. The methodology of the Rich List has evolved over the years, and many on the list are now more cooperative about commenting on their affairs and their valuations. Some, however, don't even know how wealthy they are themselves. Rich List valuer Neville Glaser says while an accurate valuation of private wealth is nigh on impossible, the laws of probability help to get the valuation within a believable range. Here are some techniques we use. Some valuations are easy because the wealth is visible and in listed shares that can be easily valued, for example, Sir Stephen Tyndall or Sir Michael Hill. Where the wealth was created in a private company that was subsequently sold, the value of the family is established at the date of sale and then incrementally increased from year to year if the family appears to conserve their wealth. If they launch into risky ventures that aren't paying off, the wealth can be incrementally reduced from date of sale. If the wealth is in a large private company still owned by the family and no value has ever been placed on the business, some detective work is needed. First, we look for benchmarks, like any turnover figures available. Check what the profit margin percentage is on similar listed companies. From that, we calculate annual profit. We apply an industry PE or price earnings ratio to profit to get value of the business. A reasonable after-tax profit margin for a large building group is 5%. To property development. The starting point for property developers is that they use the bank's money and make a small margin, and virtually all of them will eventually be caught on the wrong side of a development and go bust or go dormant. Exceptions are the old developers with a track record of decades of successful development who will have real capital invested in their business. For property investors, again, property investors only become truly wealthy if they've outlived several cycles and repeatedly bought into depressed markets like Sir Robert Jones. New wealth in the property market is usually highly leveraged with bank debt. Overseas wealth. Seriously wealthy New Zealanders who make good overseas like Graham Hart, Stephen Jennings and the Chandler brothers tend to appear in overseas rich lists such as Forbes and the UK Sunday Times. The Forbes valuations have consistently seemed overstated but can be used as a benchmark nonetheless. With these people, movement in the currency can make a big difference. To the building industry, New Zealand residential building consents fell 4.1% in June as construction intentions in Canterbury tapered off, with the region's housing rebuild nearing a plateau. According to Stats New Zealand, seasonally adjusted consents for all dwelling types dropped to 2,058 in June from 2,146 in May. New house consents declined 0.4% to 1,519. On an adjusted basis, dwelling consents rose 7.9% to 2,042 from the same month a year earlier, as intentions to build new retirement units, townhouses, offset a drop in plans for new apartments. New housing consents increased 0.8% to 1,502. Canterbury consents fell to 544 from 623 a year earlier, while Auckland permits rose to 704 from 599. Business Indicators manager Clara Etherly said new dwelling consents growth this month was led by Auckland, which offset the fall in Canterbury. The Ministry of Business's 2015 National Construction Pipeline Report, released yesterday, shows $209.4 billion of work projected over the next 6 years, peaking in 2016 at $36.5 billion of work. While the value of work is likely to reach a record, the volume is lagging behind due to the increased cost of building. Today's data shows annual residential issuance rose 7.9% to 25,154, with new housing consents flat at 17,917. The value of residential permits rose 9% to 689 million in June from a year earlier, for an 11% annual gain to 8.08 billion. The value of non-residential work fell 7.5% to 454 million in June, for a 17% annual increase to 5.36 billion.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant, an unparalleled private dining room choice. NBR Radio.
NBR Radio, Thursday the 30th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me, Whale Oil, Cameron Slater. Cameron Slater, obviously Colin Craig has made some pretty serious allegations that you have defamed him. Have you engaged in attack politics?
Of course I've engaged in attack politics. It's what I do. But it's a little bit rich of Colin Craig to accuse people of defamatory comments when he has a press conference, makes all sorts of allegations without any foundation of fact or truth, and produces a document that he hands out to the media to spread around willy-nilly, and then jumps in the media himself. It's like he doesn't want to actually litigate this in a court. He wants to litigate this in the court of public opinion. And I'm not sure it was someone whose party is scoring 0.7% in the polls is going to do too well in the court of public opinion.
He says, though, you've been making false allegations against him.
Well, I can stack up every single allegation that I've made against him with documents and with sources and with other information that's come to me. And many of the claims that he's made in that document, including ascribing the emails that he says are from me, aren't from me. And the claims that he's made that there's some sort of conspiracy against him, you've got to put it in context. This is a guy who doesn't think there was any moon landings and that the 9/11 attacks were by the US government. So, you've got to wonder about his thinking processes in pursuing legal action when that's the sort of stuff that he believes.
I'm assuming that you actually welcome this action.
Oh, of course. It's brilliant. Because what will happen is in the court, we'll be able to examine in minute detail the documents and the facts that I've got at my disposal, where I was able to form not only my honest held belief that this guy's a ratbag, but also that it's the truth, is what I said.
So you stand by every allegation that you have made against Colin Craig, and that you have evidence to prove that your allegations are all factually correct?
Well, as far as I know, because I don't know what his allegations are, he hasn't served documents. He's grandstanded. It's almost like what he's trying to do is defame me and other people ahead of court action in order to prejudice a legal argument. It's a ridiculous way to do things. You either serve documents and get on with it. You don't rush out and have press conferences, issue little booklets, and then run around and talk to every media outlet there is. This just shows the extreme narcissism of this guy, that he thinks it's all about him.
I'm going to play you a piece of audio with him speaking about you.
In my case, he's gone way too far. he'll pay a price and a consequence for that. But I think there are other people he's made comments about, unfairly so, who will never have the opportunity ultimately to get that made good, and I think that's unfortunate.
So he's saying that he's effectively going to take you on to represent everybody else who hasn't taken you on. What do you say to that?
Well, again, it's a highly defamatory statement that he's made there. It's just utterly ridiculous. This is a guy who's entering into politics. Now, I'm not even sure his lawyers have pointed out to him Longy v. Atkinson, because it's almost impossible to defame a politician. And robust debate it must occur in politics at all times. What he's doing is trying to silence people. It's how he operates his business. It's how he operates his political party. But I don't tolerate narcissism. I don't tolerate bullying either. And so I'll stand up to him. And for every person he's bullied in the past, both in business and in politics, well, then I'll go into the court and I'll be standing for them.
But he responds that effectively you take people on that you happen to dislike or you disagree with, and you just seek to systematically take them out.
Well, we live in a democracy, and you're entitled to have opinions about people. Now, I happen to think that Colin Craig's a political retard and a ratbag, and I'm entitled to say that. He might not like that, but that's too bad. And the claim that he's saying that he's being damaged to these huge amounts of money is just ridiculous. I mean, for a start, you can't claim losses on a liability, and you'd have to say that Colin Craig and the Conservative Party are a liability.
You're going to fund your own defence?
Well, I'm doing that at the moment. I find it entertaining, and I'm mildly successful at it too. So, I don't see why I should have to try and dip into huge amounts of money. It does cost money, though, to do it. It costs money for research and it costs money for advice. But I'm pretty sure that my readers will back me 100% or 120%. As soon as he actually produces some paperwork, then we'll know what we're in for, and we'll be able to ask the readers to support that.
He says that he's going to throw everything at this financially. You must be concerned about that.
Well, not really. I mean, he's thrown everything financially at the Conservative Party and standing for the mayoralty, and in every step of the way, his deluded little campaigns have always lost, and I think this will just be another one.
He accepts that he's human, that he's made mistakes. Does that mean that he should be judged and subjected to the sort of attacks that you and your blog site have made against him?
Well, I wouldn't call them attacks. I would call it telling the truth. Colin Craig likes to claim that he's the anti-politician. He likes to claim that he is better than every other politician. But in actual fact, he's a shabby little coward who hides behind lawyers and seeks to bully people into silence. He thinks that what was published was awful. What wasn't published is much more awful, but that will now have to come out in the court, because I'll have to demonstrate to the court why A, what I said is true, and B, why I have an honest-held belief that he's a ratbag. And
so you have more evidence that you are going to reveal during the course of this case. How damaging is that going to be?
Well, Colin Craig's will be completely damaged and discredited. There's no possibility at all of winning action against me, and the evidence will show that. But as I said, let's wait until we get some documents. Colin Craig has a habit of saying that he's going to sue people. He tried it against the civilian. He did it against Russell Norman. God knows how many other people he's done the same thing to, but almost invariably these never end up in court.
By the end of this case, do you believe that you will be able to prove that Colin Craig won't be going back into politics?
Colin Craig won't be going back into politics. He needs to look at the polls. Unfortunately, he has a habit of getting tame pollsters to come up with results like he did in Rodney electorate, where he claimed he had 53% of the support, and then come the election result, Mark Mitchell caned him.
And what next for this? Where do you plan to take things next when it comes to Colin Craig?
Well, I won't stop speaking the truth about Colin Craig. I won't be subjected to his economic bullying to try and silence people from the unpalatable truth of his lifestyle and his choices. So, I'll just carry on.
Will you publish material ahead of the case, or will you seek to reveal everything within the case itself?
I haven't determined what I'll do yet. I had to recover a bit from the sore sides from the laughter from yesterday, but we'll get there.
Cameron Slater on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. Free to air online. NBR, the meeting place of intelligent business.
In aviation news, plane debris that has washed ashore on Reunion Island in the southwestern Indian Ocean could be that of missing Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. But French Air Accident Investigation Agency BEA, which is studying the information in coordination with Malaysian and Australian authorities, say it's too soon to establish this as fact. BEA says it's not possible at this time to ascertain whether the part is from a Boeing 777 or from MH370. A police official in Reunion, a French territory near Madagascar, says the debris appears to be an aircraft wing measuring 2 to 3 metres by 1.5. The official is quoted as saying it's not the piece of a small plane. Flight MH370 disappeared on March the 8th, 2014. After taking off from Kuala Lumpur en route to Beijing, it veered sharply from its intended path and is believed to have crashed far off the coast of southwest Australia in the southern Indian Ocean. Search teams have covered a 50,000 square kilometre zone in the Indian Ocean, but have failed to find any trace of the aircraft. All 239 on board are presumed dead. French news agency AFP says Xavier Titelman, a Paris-based aviation consultant who previously worked on maritime patrol planes for the French Navy, has examined pictures of the debris with colleagues and compared them to a large number of aircraft types. He said it looks like the wreckage of a 777, citing both its shape and other features visible on the plane. Mr. Titelman suggests the part appeared to be a flaperon, a control surface on a plane's wing. He also notes a reference on the wreckage BB670. He says this code is not a plane's registration number nor serial number. However, it's clear that this reference would allow a quick identification. In a few days, we will have a definitive answer. Manufacturer Boeing says in a statement it remained committed to supporting the MH370 investigation and the search for the airplane. The statement says we continue to share our technical expertise and analysis. Our goal, along with the entire global aviation industry, continues to be not only to find the airplane, but also to determine what happened and why. The debris was found in the early morning on a beach near Saint-André, a town on the northwest coast of Reunion. A witness told AFP it was covered in shells, so one would say it had been in the water a long time. In People News, Sir John Todd, the patriarch of New Zealand's rich-list Todd family, has died aged 88 after a period of illness. His son Mike Todd said in a statement the former chairman of Todd Corp died at his Wellington home on Wednesday evening. Sir John worked his way up through the family business, started by his grandfather Charles Todd, entering the firm in 1945. He was appointed managing director of Todd Motors in 1968, deputy chairman of the board in 1978, and chairman of the new entity Todd Corp in 1987 until his retirement in December 2011. Mike Todd said our father was a highly respected New Zealander who made a significant contribution to business and philanthropy. He was a man of enterprise and grace, and he will be greatly missed. The Todd family business, estimated in this year's NBR Rich List to be worth $3.16 billion, spans a range of investments including energy exploration and extraction, electricity retailing, minerals, property, winemaking, telecommunications and healthcare. The family is increasingly investing offshore. Todd Corp is currently engaged in mopping up the remaining shares of ASX-listed Rutila Resources, which is developing the Bala Bala iron ore project in Pilbara, Western Australia, and is developing a methanol plant in the US state of Louisiana. Sir John was also involved in the family's philanthropic trust, chairing the Todd Foundation since 1988. The foundation gave out almost $4.7 million in grants last year to a range of projects across the country. In 2012, he was knighted for his contributions to business, having been made a Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2009. Market news, CDL Investments, the residential property developer controlled by Millennium and Copthorne Hotels New Zealand, lifted first half profits 3.6% on what it called satisfactory sales that reflected the current market. The company said net profit rose to $8.5 million or 3.08 cents in the 6 months ended June 30 from $8.3 million or 2.99 cents a year earlier. Revenue fell 4.1% to $23.9 million, and the improved margin came through lower cost of sales and cheaper selling expenses. The company anticipates annual profit to beat the $14.7 million it reported last year. Chairman Wong Hung Ren said the level of sales made in the first half of 2015 is satisfactory and reflects current market conditions. In terms of sales for the remainder of the year, we expect the current tempo to continue. The board didn't declare an interim dividend. CDL shares were unchanged at 64 cents and have gained 19% this year. Managing Director BK Chu said the company sold 128 sections at subdivisions in Hamilton, Hawke's Bay and Rolleston. Additional stages at CDL's Stonebrook development in Rolleston and Magellan Heights in Hamilton had been completed, and earthworks were underway at sites in Auckland and Christchurch.
NBR Radio with Hotel de Brett, partying since 1959. www.hoteldebret.com. NBR Radio.
NBR Radio, Friday the 30th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me, former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you feeling about this latest turn of events?
Well, look, I was pretty happy yesterday to be able to announce that we were doing something to respond to the really significant and large number of allegations that have been put out there. So it's good to be going onto the front foot. We've worked on this for many weeks.
Do you believe that you have been subjected to a systematic attack here?
Yeah, well, look, to use the words of one particularly well-known blogger, I would call it a strategy that has been worked out, and I think that's a pretty accurate description.
What evidence do you have for that?
Well, obviously, we've got the email exchange between two people. We also, you simply have to look at the blog sites of the respective people involved here. They each post each other's stuff. This is not a one-off comment. This is a week-after-week campaign of stuff. And one of the bloggers refers to death by 1,000 cuts. The other calls it, I think, a full revealing of the truth step by step, or something similar to that. So, they've sort of made this very much a strategy.
You've alleged that Whale Oil Cameron Slater has been communicating regularly with John Stringer via email. He says that's not the case.
All I've done is expose some email communication between two people. I haven't alleged anything other than that's an exchange that took place between them.
How serious are you about this action?
Oh, entirely serious. I don't waste time with something that I'm not serious about. I come from a commercial background. I've obviously been successful commercially. You don't make idle threats and you don't waste people's time unless you're serious about something.
So you will throw everything at this financially that it's going to take?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, no, you count the cost before you go into these things. We had that discussion with my lawyers last week. We've worked out exactly where we go with this. It's a plan that we will be actioning. What
do you hope to gain by this action?
Well, look, I think there's more than one thing I hope to get out of it. I mean, the first thing is I truly don't believe that dirty politics is good for this country. I do believe that we need fair and open debate and a good process, and we don't get that if there's attack agendas using defamation against people, whether it's me or somebody else. And I'm not the first to be targeted, but I would like to be the last. That's the first thing. For me personally, obviously, a court judgment gives people of the country a clear steer as to who's telling the truth and who they can trust. I don't believe your average punter at the moment can do that. They've got two different stories being told. Who do you believe? A court judgment will give them that.
If you hold yourself accountable for your own standards of behaviour as the Conservative leader, or as the leader of the Conservative Party, do you believe you came up short?
Oh, I'm not a perfect person. I don't believe that I've been fairly judged by some, particularly those who I'm taking action against. Clearly, I think not. I think these guys have made a lot of statements and a lot of criticisms which are totally false. Some of those are very serious claims. So I don't claim to be perfect. I'm learning as I'm going. I think it's important to remember I've only been in politics, 4 years now. And it is something you learn as you go. I'd never dealt with the media until I started doing so 4 years ago. I'm getting better at it. And that's the only promise I make, to do my best, to do the best I can, make the effort, get up every morning and put my all into it. That's the commitment that I make.
Do you have a clear conscience, though, about all of your personal actions during your time as leader of the Conservative Party?
Look, I certainly do have a clear conscience. That doesn't mean I've been perfect, but it does mean that if I think I've done...
But that comes back to the definition of perfect, isn't it?
Yeah, no, so if I think I've done something wrong, I always work on the principle that you not only apologise, but you put it right. And so I'm comfortable that I've always done that. That's the way I try and live my life. Sometimes that's harder than others. And you know, I've lived, 46, 47 years of life now, and nobody in that time is 100% perfect. But I think it's about owning your mistakes and putting them right, and that's what I do.
So if you were to go back in time, during your time as leader of the Conservative Party, are there substantive things that you would have done different within your personal life?
I think the answer for everybody, if you ask them could they go back in time and change things, they would. For the most part, I wouldn't change things, but there would be some things I would change. Inevitably, there would be some decisions or some moments where you go, gosh, if I'd done that interview or not done the other interview, I might have been better off. We don't get to live life that way. We just have to make do with the efforts and the achievements that we do make. So for me, I look at it and I go, yep, if you want to judge me and ask me, have I got 100%? Clearly not, but nobody would have. And I think that's all I can promise people is to do my best. I will not always get it right. Some of the interviews I've done, I know people have criticised some of the things I've said. It's okay. That's the world of politics. It's a bit of an art. It's a bit of a judgment call sometimes.
But what about the nature of your relationship with your former advisor?
Well, look, I've always said, and go back to that, for the most part it was a great working relationship and a friendship. And I was thankful for the work and effort that she put in. Obviously, it publicly ended badly. I regret that, but I don't consider that was primarily my doing.
But there must have been some element of your doing that contributed to that.
Well, unfortunately, I can't talk about that. I want to be able to. I feel that it would be in the public interest too. We have put that to the person involved and said, look, we think it would be in the public interest of both of us to be able to talk freely. But it's somebody else's privacy at stake, and I did sign confidentiality, and I have to live with that.
What do you say to Cameron Slater?
Well, I don't have a lot to say to Cameron Slater other than obviously he needs to get good legal advice at this time. He's said, no, he rejects my... I mean, we obviously gave him indication that we were considering legal action. He took that pretty lightly and mocked it. He said he stands by all his comments. Well, I stand by all of mine. Only one of us can be right, and the court will decide that.
He's going to represent himself.
Well, that doesn't surprise me entirely, although I think it's possibly unwise.
Do you disagree with the way he runs Whale Oil?
Look, I think blogs need to be exciting and interesting, and in part it's a business enterprise and he's got to make his own business decisions. I'm not his business advisor. I think where I disagree with him is where he crosses the line into defamation or where he makes unnecessary and badly judged personal attacks on people. Now, in my case, he's gone way too far. He'll pay a price and a consequence for that. But I think there are other people he's made comments about, unfairly so, who will never have the opportunity ultimately to get that made good. And I think that's unfortunate.
And what is the nature of the defamation?
Well, it's broad, and in terms of the actual number of defamatory statements, they are multitudinous. I mean, we're talking about a file that is already very, very thick. So it's not simple to sum it up in one phrase. But generally speaking, he's essentially alleged a number of events or things that have happened which have not, and then drawn conclusions about my character or my good standing based on those. So that's what defamation is. It's essentially an unfair judgment of another person, which you broadcast. The more you broadcast that, the more you add different allegations which are false, the more egregious that breach becomes.
How has this affected you?
Well, look, I'll be honest, the last 6 weeks have been very difficult. I'm used to people, politics is a sort of a rough game, so people will make allegations from time to time and you can defend against those. I think what surprised me was just the sheer ferocity, day after day, new allegation after new allegation, particularly my wife, who generally stays away from the media. It wasn't possible anymore because people would stop her in the street and go, oh my goodness, I hear Colin done this or whatever. And that became very difficult. And I think it's the first time that we've had that sort of personal, intense, family, friends, people broadly, ring up going, oh my goodness, I just heard such and such. Is that true? It's the first time it's got to that sort of level. And Helen, my wife, spoke about that yesterday and said that, she has found it very difficult to be a victim of such a determined campaign of lies.
Do you regret going into politics?
No, I don't, because I think we need people to step up. I'm very happy to represent conservative thinking people in this country. I believe we need a smaller government. I believe we need a more efficient government. And I am socially conservative, and I'm happy to represent those values. Do I regret it? Not for a moment. Has this recent experience been tough? Yes, but then I'm a tough person. I actually enjoy a bit of argy-bargy, and while I don't think court is always or necessarily the right answer, sometimes it has to be, and of course it's an environment in which I am comfortable.
Isn't there a high risk here that this action could damage you? I mean, Slater could win, and you will end up spending a lot of money. It will further damage your reputation and will certainly reduce any likelihood of you ever getting back into politics again.
Well, look, life is a risk. Nothing, in my view, is ever 100% certain. But the approach I've always taken in business, for example, is you make sure you calculate those risks. And this is not something I just thought of yesterday and decided to get up and talk about. This is something that's been well planned, researched. We've done our homework. I don't believe there's much risk of losing here, clearly. And so I don't go into these things lightly. It's an expensive exercise. I don't like losing, and my court record makes it very clear that I pick my battles and plan well.
Do you believe that you were too loose in your style? I mean, you never struck me as somebody who was really serious about politics, because if you had have been, you wouldn't have made some of the statements, some of the crazy statements that you made sort of around sort of moon landings and so forth as well. You wouldn't have engaged in some of the personal actions that you may regret now. For somebody who was really serious about politics, why didn't you get more serious personally? Yeah,
look, I think that's quite a fair question. So starting off, do I think I was too relaxed or used the word loose? I guess there's a thing here where I am of a different generation from some others. And I am a fairly relaxed individual. I'm casual. I enjoy a bit of banter and joking around. And I do take things in a fairly light-hearted and jovial way most of the time. It's part of the reason I find life so much fun, perhaps. But I accept, and I think it's a fair criticism of me, that carried through into my political life to a greater degree than it should have. And I think that's part of what I was talking about, the learning curve. You start going, well, you know what, actually, I might be having fun and the other person might be having fun, but what does someone perceive as happening when they read that on the newspaper, or it gets repackaged for a 2-minute radio sort of clip? And I've learning that as I'm going along. So I think the question is a very fair one. I think it's one of those things that you do have to make some adjustments for public life, and that's one of them that I'm having to make.
Are you going to go back into politics?
Well, I consider myself still to be a representative of people standing up on issues. For me, dirty politics is something that New Zealanders do not like. Nicky Hager's book, even though he and I are on very different ends of a political spectrum, nonetheless raised an issue which I think's above partisan politics, and that is the way we do politics. Are we going to have fair debate? So this is an issue that matters to New Zealand. The New Zealanders, it was a best-selling book. New Zealanders are fair, decent and honest people, and we don't like foul play. So for me, I'm actually still on an issue that matters to people at the moment. So for me, I haven't left politics, but whether I go back as the leader of the Conservative Party is really up to the party. I loved doing it, let's be fair. I like representing people, and I love standing for the issues that I care about.
So if you did go back, how would Colin Craig be different, Mark II?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot that comes out of the battle that I'm in at the moment. I mean, a number of media people personally have said to me, gosh, you're brave. Because Cameron Slater refers to himself as the most feared blogger in the country, and there is an amount of fear that goes with that. So I think this is going to be a good, hard fight. I'm expecting a good contest. I'll be disappointed if there's not. Coming out the other side of this, if I'm going back in as the leader of the Conservative Party, you might find a slightly more hardened, less jovial individual. I think that's probably likely.
And you're confident?
I'm very confident in the court case. How I work out in politics in New Zealand is really up to our supporters.
Colin Craig, thanks for joining us here on NBR Radio.
Thank you.
NBR Radio. Free to air online with business news you can use.
I'm Grant Walker with Last Call. Here's what's trending on NBR Online. The 2015 NBR Rich List is out, so who's in, who's out, and who is new to the list? And remember to pick up your hard copy of the Rich List tomorrow. Plus, Jetstar adds 6 domestic routes, record profit outlook for Briscoes, Sir John Todd dies, and NBR talks to both Cameron Slater and Colin Craig. To find out more on our stories, just log on to nbr.co.nz or stay tuned. Those stories coming up next on NBR Radio. Market news. Sir Ron Brierley's Mercantile Investment has won over the board of takeover target Ask Funding after sweetening its offer last week. Brisbane-based Ask Funding today said its board has reconsidered the upgraded offer of 8 cents Australian per share and will recommend it to shareholders. Ask Funding has been winding down its businesses since 2011 and servicing its loan books to repay Bank of Western Australia with a view to distributing surplus funds to shareholders. It rejected Mercantile's original offer of 7 cents Australian per share and today said it anticipates its upcoming audited accounts will show a net tangible asset value of 8.5 cents per share. The ASX-listed stock last traded at 7.2. Mercantile already owns 19.9% of Ask Funding and launched a takeover bid at the start of July, saying the offer provided them certainty against the risks of trying to realise the remainder of the loan book. The firm is at least the third diversified investment vehicle for Sir Ron, who built Guinness Peak Group after being forced out of Brierley Investments in the early 1990s. The group named for him struggled to recover from the 87 share market crash and now exists as Duoco Leisure with its primary listing on the Singapore Stock Exchange. Sir Ron seized control of ASX-listed Mercantile, then called India Equities Fund, in 2012, when shareholders agreed to a deal giving him 54% of the company and its chair in return for his stakes in Copperstrike, Trinity Group, ING Community Living Group, Australian Pharmaceutical Industries and Trojan Equity. The holding has since been watered down to 46% after Mercantile completed a takeover of Murchison Metals via a scheme of arrangement, which let investors take either cash or shares. Since then, he brought in his old comrades Ron Langley and Gary Weiss via a $2 million Australian placement. The company has since added a secondary listing on the NZX, where its shares rose 1.3% to 15.5 cents. They last traded on the ASX at 14 cents Australian. To the NBR 2015 Rich List, putting a figure on private wealth is never easy, especially since New Zealanders don't tend to flaunt their wealth. But there's no question that the past few years have been good ones for the country's wealthy and for entrepreneurs and investors who are prepared to risk their capital for financial reward. This year's NBR Rich List reveals sizable gains in personal and family fortunes over the past 12 months. New riches have been amassed, much of it self-made, from creating businesses that employ thousands of people here and overseas. The rampant property market is also responsible for the surge in private wealth, while a bigger, more diverse local share market is giving business owners the opportunity to sell down and take profits. This year, the collective fortunes of 184 individuals and families total more than $55 billion, an increase of $3.8 billion on 2014. This is the biggest proportional increase since the Rich List first appeared in 1986. Back then, it started with 55 individuals and 12 families with a total minimum net worth of $5.3 billion. Some of those originals still appear today, names like Brierley, Spencer, Jones and Heatley, to name a few. Many have fallen off the list or passed their wealth on to others. This year, we celebrate 15 newcomers who have derived their wealth from many different sectors. These range from technology to farming to hospitality and aged care and, of course, property. Two of them, Malcolm Dick and Annette Presley, made their return 8 years after they last appeared following the sale of Call Plus for $250 million. The Rich List follows 4 months of research by a team led by Vicky Jane, who worked tirelessly putting together the information. When it came to drafting new entries, we started with a list of more than 30 names, knowing that some wouldn't make the $50 million threshold. Ms. Jane says it's hard to trace some of the wealth and some people don't want to be on the list. But she says in many ways the actual money is not that important. It's the stories behind it and the fact that these people have achieved a high level of success. You don't get the money unless you achieve at a high level in the area you're functioning. It's very unlike winning lotto. Our estimates of personal wealth are conservative and are based mainly on publicly available sources such as company office files, share registries, land and house valuations, and newspaper clippings. Let's talk defamation. Former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig's allegations of defamation are laughable, according to the bloggers he's named. Cameron Slater and Jordan Williams say they're not at all worried about Mr Craig seeking defamation damages against them. Yesterday, Mr Craig announced defamation actions to the tune of $1.5 million against whale oil blogger Cameron Slater, Taxpayers Union Executive Director Jordan Williams, and Conservative Party board member John Stringer. Mr Craig says there are literally hundreds of allegations he and his legal team will be looking into. He's also released a booklet titled Dirty Politics and Hidden Agendas that outlines the campaign of defamatory lies he claims were purposely launched to undermine him. Mr Slater told NBR Radio this sort of behaviour is typical of Colin Craig, standing on his wallet and pretending to be tall and hurling threats around. If he wants to drag me into court and have me present all of the evidence I've got regarding him and his behaviour, well, then I'm welcoming that. Mr Slater says Mr Craig has threatened to sue the Civilian blog for a piece of satire, as well as threatened to sue Russell Norman, none of which went ahead. He said God knows how many other people he's threatened to sue. Mr Slater says Mr Craig has not made contact with him at all regarding the alleged defamation. He said Mr Craig claims he has emails between me and John Stringer. I've never communicated with John Stringer except for one email back in 2014 where he complained to me about me banning him from commenting on the blog. Mr Craig is going to find it difficult to get anywhere with this, and I would actually class this as bullying and vexatiousness. He says for Mr Craig to even claim that there is a conspiracy or an orchestration or a campaign against him is defamatory as well. He says, but I'm not a big girl's blouse who runs off to the courts because someone slighted me or said something bad. Taxpayers Union Executive Director Jordan Williams had a similar reaction, saying he's not concerned by Mr Craig's allegations at all. He says Mr Craig has a history of making litigation threats, and this is just normal Colin Craig bluff and bluster.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform www.nbrtalent.co.nz.
Thursday the 30th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson. Welcome to this NBR radio special. The NBR Rich List is out. It went live on the NBR website Thursday at 3 p.m. Print subscribers will get their hard copies with their NBRs on Friday the 31st. To discuss the Rich List, I'm joined by our panel, Susan St John, Associate Professor and Co-Director of the University of Auckland Business School's Retirement Policy and Research Centre. Also joining me, Liz Gibbs, Chief Executive of Philanthropy New Zealand, and Duncan Bridgman, News Editor here at NBR. Duncan, to you first, what an amazing list of people you've documented here. What's new in this year's Rich List?
Yeah, Andrew, it is. It's a 3-month research project, and it's great to have it out there now. Look, it's probably the biggest Rich List we've had. In fact, it is. We've got 15 newcomers this year, and combined they bring in another $1.2 billion worth of wealth. And overall, the homegrown New Zealanders are collectively worth $55 billion. And look, there's some incredible stories behind the money, but what we're seeing is growth among most sectors these people operate in, and it's the property market, the rampant share market over the last couple of years, and just a propensity for sort of entrepreneurial and risk taking and putting capital on the line. We've got some big movers that you mentioned. There's 15 newcomers, and 2 of those are making a reappearance after 8 years, having been off the list when they were first on it, and that is Malcolm Dick and Annette Presley, and they're back on after their business Call Plus was sold to an Australian company.
So what struck you most perhaps about this year's Rich List particularly?
Well, we have noticed I mean, aside from the gains in their net worth, what we're seeing is a lot of stories about individuals giving back to the community, and there's a lot of philanthropy projects going on. And I did a wee exercise yesterday where I flicked through some random pages of the Rich List and just started reading. And just about on every page or two that you come across, you'll find a profile where there's a lot of talk about what they're doing in terms of charity and be that supporting things like the arts or educational scholarships. I mean, also kind of children's hospitals and things like that. So it really is a standout, and that's good to see.
Liz Gibbs, I'll come to you shortly to discuss the philanthropy side of things. But first to you, Susan St John. There will be some, of course, who look at the wealth in these pages and then look at some of the issues we have in society and say, this doesn't match up. Are you one of those?
I'm afraid I am. I don't really see anything to celebrate in these figures when we are living in a climate where so many people are struggling, where social agencies are beside themselves, dealing with people who just cannot meet their basic needs. The growth at the top, and as we've heard, a lot of that is coming from passive income, the share market, property market, not through sustained labour effort. It's a recipe for social conflict, I think, and we have to be very careful the way in which we talk about the celebratory aspect of this.
Is it right, though, to recognise those who have achieved the pinnacle of business success, because we know ultimately that is strongly correlated with the success of economies generally?
No, I think that that's increasingly being questioned. So we have the IMF, for example, saying how concerned they are about the growing inequality and how bad that is for growth. And that's backed up by work from the OECD, and increasingly economists are beginning to be very worried indeed about the growth of the top end of the distribution. It's not about wanting to knock the tall poppies, not at all. It's about just questioning the link between the growth of affluence at the top of the distribution and the growth of misery, despair, and negative equity at the bottom of the distribution. What I would really like to see is the NBR producing a poor list, not naming and shaming those at the bottom, but just a balance to this good story that seems to be being told about the wealth at the top end.
Do you believe that those who are fortunate enough to be wealthy in this country are conscious of the, what goes with that in terms of sharing their wealth?
Look, I think it's really appropriate that the rich are philanthropic and that they do good work, but we can't see much evidence of that denting the accumulation of their wealth in these figures. And my concern is that it's a very 19th century approach to think that we can solve the problems of economic disparity by philanthropic gestures. And unfortunately we have examples such as the Owen Glenn Domestic Violence Task Force and his $8 million promise to South Auckland, where private charity doesn't always work well for the very people that it should.
And as somebody who's been following this for some time, is your sense that this problem is actually getting worse?
I'm afraid so. When I look out there and I see the families that are struggling with crippling house costs, we know that 30% with households with children earn less than the living wage. We know that they're poorly supported by the welfare state, which is becoming more fragmented day by day. Working for families is being cut back. The tax system really penalises them. GST is extraordinarily high on everything that poor families spend their money on. We've seen problems in the education sector. Just this week, talk of 44% of students who can't meet their basic needs. So, and I could go on. There's all sorts of problems happening with poor children in New Zealand. We have very high rates of preventable third world diseases arriving out of poor housing conditions. and far too many children, 180,000, the statistics show us, living in serious hardship. So with all those things happening, we do have to balance this good news story.
All right, Duncan Bridgman, your response to some of those issues that Susan St John has raised?
Yeah, well, I mean, Susan, respectfully, I disagree with a couple of your points, but and I would say though that the rich list itself, the people on the rich list, actually do employ hundreds and thousands of people in this economy. So they are taking people with them and creating business, creating jobs, and bringing more wealth to people under them. So, I mean, I think you can't just kind of pigeonhole them in terms of them just getting wealth from the air. You know, they're creating this, and also the idea of us producing a poor list. I don't think that's going to help at all. I think that would possibly make things worse. It would just be patronising, I think.
Susan St John, I mean, has anybody produced a poor list in the world in this
well,
context?
I just put that up just to draw attention to what's happening at the bottom end.
But on the whole, the media though does give quite, shows like Campbell Live prior to its axing used to focus a lot on those issues. So don't you think that actually people who are at the bottom of the ladder do get a reasonable amount of exposure within the media?
I think what's not being talked about is the narrative of inequality and the connection of the growth of the wealth at the top with the increasing immiseration at the bottom. And I just have to call into question this idea that the rich create the jobs. What we're seeing is a growth in passive income. It's not necessarily in job creation. And when we look at the wages as a share of national output, if we go back to the 1980s, we've seen a declining share going to wages and an increasing share going to capital. In fact, New Zealand is quite out of line in the OECD countries in terms of having such a low wage share. So there are connections. To me, there is a story to be told about the siphoning off of the productive work of workers to the top end, to very affluent lifestyles that are enjoyed by the billionaires. And I see this as a recipe for social incohesion and dislocation, which is really unfortunate.
Duncan Bridgman, a quick response, and we'll go to Liz Gibbs shortly.
I mean, there's no question there's inequality all around the world, and it is it's a major issue. But I just have to go back to what you were saying, Susan, and that's these passive investments in property in the share market. Of the 15 newcomers we have this year, all of them, I think, bar about one, have created their wealth through the establishment of a business, and that's from the ground up. They've founded the business. They've created this opportunity for others as well. And sure, yes, they've taken their profits at the end of it, and that's just the way it is. But however, they are creating the wealth themselves. It's not like they're just had a whole pile of money to start with and invested it in property and the share market, and there it is. That's all there for them. So, I mean, there has to be some perspective given to that. And the likes of Rod Jury, for example, he's on the rich list. He's created a world-leading company in the technology cloud space, and I don't think you could put him in the category that you're talking about.
All right, let's come to Liz Gibbs now from Philanthropy New Zealand. I guess to an extent, Liz, Philanthropy New Zealand is a beneficiary of this wealth creation, because at a certain point in their lives, people then start, wanting to make that available to others. Have you seen a noticeable uptick in philanthropic activity in the last few years?
Yes, we've seen a very significant increase in philanthropy over the last 10 years. We conduct research that's independently completed by Burl, each 5 years, and that has shown us there's been an increase by 80% of philanthropy in New Zealand. It's increased from around $1.27 billion of contribution to communities to $2.7 billion in the last year. However, I would agree with Susan. I think there are significant social issues in New Zealand, but I'd also balance that and say that philanthropy is making quite a significant contribution to address some of those issues. And in fact, in 2011, that figure equaled 1.35% of GDP.
So does your research demonstrate that wealthy people are giving more than in the past?
Yes, it does. It's that figure's increased. Personal giving and family and foundation giving has increased to around $271 million, and that's an increase on 28% from the previous research. So it is increasing. Part of our remit is to encourage a generous Aotearoa New Zealand, and of course we encourage people to give more and to give strategically. So there's clearly more to be done, but I think we shouldn't look past the contribution that people are making in a completely voluntary capacity.
Have you been able to establish why that is happening, why there has been that change in sentiment?
Yeah, I think there is. We are seeing a flow of high net worth individuals, New Zealanders who perhaps have been quite successful in business overseas, returning to New Zealand, and many of those people are involved in both philanthropy, commercial activities, as well as angel investment, particularly in the area of social enterprise, where you have high net worth people investing in organisations that are producing both a profit and a social purpose. So the landscape is changing quite significantly. I think there are also, there's global trends we look at, like Warren Buffett establishing the Giving Pledge, whereby over 100 very wealthy individuals commit to giving half of their wealth away in their lifetime. And we see domestic examples of this, like the Next Foundation set up by the Plougmans, who have decided to spend down $100 million over the next 10 years specifically into education and environment in New Zealand. So there is a change in the way that people are giving. It's increasingly around a very focused approach to creating impact, an increasing interest in collaboration, which we saw a lot of coming out of the earthquake recovery process in Canterbury, whereby funders are now working together much more closely and actually leveraging the benefit of their experience and expertise and investment for greater community good. The other thing I would say also is that there are trends on blended returns, like the Social Impact Bond Initiative, which is just commencing here in New Zealand, following from the UK and the US, where those initiatives have been going for some 10 years now, where investors, whether they're private or commercial or philanthropic, invest in bonds structured to provide both social outcomes as well as financial outcomes. So the landscape's changing, and I think the amount of money and investment coming into philanthropy is also increasing.
So do you believe the wealthy have an obligation to support charities or other fundraising activities? And how do you see the difference in the philosophy in New Zealand compared to the US, where there is a much greater sense of obligation in the US that when you reach a certain point, then you certainly give that money away? And perhaps there are tax incentives that make that perhaps more attractive.
Yes. I mean, essentially, I think it creates a good culture and a good community if we all give, and not all of us are extremely wealthy, but we can give in terms of our time or our intellect or our different contribution. It doesn't necessarily have to be financial. I think that does lend itself to a much more progressive and engaged community. And as Winston Churchill said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. So, yes, part of our remit also is to encourage giving and to encourage thoughtful giving. The culture change is interesting. Again, a lot of the people we see now returning to New Zealand have worked and been successful commercially in other countries, and so bring some of that philanthropic intent back with them. I would say also there's a change in the generations. If we look at the Sam Morgans of this world, who are incredibly generous, particularly in the areas of microfinance, philanthropy was always part of his thinking. So it's not an add-on, and it's also not an add-on to when people are older. So increasingly we're seeing successful young entrepreneurs like Derek Handley, for example, structuring their giving much earlier on in their careers. So again, there's generational changes, there's cultural changes, and overall we're seeing that increase flow through into the amount of philanthropy into New Zealand.
All right, I'll just ask each of our panellists to perhaps give us a closing comment. Duncan Bridgman?
Well, I think when it comes to philanthropy and the rich list that is the measure of their success at the end of the day, and that's what Liz was just talking about, and I totally agree with that. And I think we are starting to see that, and I would hope that it is starting to make a dent in the problems that we've got at the other end of the spectrum.
Susan St John.
I would agree with Liz that it's a really good thing that we're all generous and that we all give, but unfortunately private charity can't solve the systemic problems, and so I think the increasing reliance on private charity, and social bonds were mentioned, going down in that direction is not a recipe for more equality. So while applauding the generosity of everyone who gives, there is still a lot more thinking to be done on this.
Finally, Liz Gibbs.
Yeah, New Zealand has some significant social issues, but we can all make a contribution. And it's fantastic to see the contribution that philanthropy and high net worth individuals make. And this is part of us all investing and creating a better and stronger New Zealand for the future.
Thank you all for joining us, speaking to Duncan Bridgman, news editor at NBR, Liz Gibbs, Chief Executive of Philanthropy New Zealand, and Associate Professor Susan St John, Co-Director of the University of Auckland Business School's Retirement Policy and Research Centre. This has been an NBR radio special.
Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today. www.nbr.co.nz/subscribe. NBR.
To the Rich List newbies, this year saw a record number of newcomers since the NBR Rich List threshold was raised to 50 million a half-decade ago. To read the full profiles and access all Rich List comment, just go to nbr.co.nz. So the 2015 newcomers are: number 1, Malcolm Dick, 150 million. IT innovator and consumer champion Malcolm Dick bounced back onto the NBR Rich List this year after selling Call Plus, the company he co-founded in 1996 and now New Zealand's third largest telco and broadband provider, to Australia's M2 for $250 million. Craig Thompson, radio, retirement, retail, 150 million. Wellington-based Craig Thompson is a quiet but canny investor whose business nous has been applied across a broad spectrum of New Zealand enterprise to good effect. Forbes Elworthy, 120 million. When it comes to promoting farming investment in New Zealand, Craig Moore Sustainable's Chief Executive Forbes Elworthy could hardly have a better pedigree. Stephen Newman at 100 million. Eero Chief Executive Steve Newman catapulted into Rich List contention following last year's share market float of the company, in which he and his wife Colette have retained a holding of more than 27%. Ross and Dallas Pendergrast. Breathing life back into tired retail areas and then selling them on has not only made Ross and Dallas Pendergrast a lot of money, it's also generated a lot of fun. So despite their recent sale of the newly renovated Pakuranga Plaza for $96 million last year, the couple has no immediate plans to hit the pause button. Annette Presley, 90 million. Technology has been the source of Annette Presley's wealth, but the feisty battler who grew up on the straightened streets of South Auckland is now stepping out into the world of high fashion on New York's Madison Avenue. Andrew and Sarah Cox at 75 mil. Hospitality, food, beer, and now rugby. Melbourne-based Kiwi Andrew Cox is getting all of life's essentials lined up in an investment portfolio whose diverse businesses employ at least 700 people and generate annual revenues of over 100 million. Adrian and Wilma Van Leeuwen, robots, rubber-floored stalls, cows that live indoors and choose when to be milked. South Canterbury farming couple Adrian and Wilma Van Leeuwen are busy pioneering new frontiers in New Zealand's dairy industry. The Hearst family, 60 million. North Otago has its share of quiet achievers who may drive a lot of the local economy, but prefer to stick behind the wheel of their trusty old station wagons and stay low-key. That's according to Doug Hearst, one of several Hearst family members who could fit that description. Christopher Reeve, 55 million. He likes to refer to himself as a simple farmer and certainly did the hard yards as a shearer, then share milker back in the 1960s and 70s. But Waiheke Island-based Chris Reeve has long lost the poor tag that he reckons was once an accepted part of that description. Brent and Denise Sutton at $55 million. It's with a note of regret that the visionary entrepreneur who founded the Sutton Group, recently sold to French food giant Danone, points out that he's managed to fly under the radar for nearly 30 years. Russell Coutts, $50 million. He's reputed to be this country's top-paid sportsman with $13 million annual salary from Oracle Team USA, plus the odd winner's bonus for helping his team securing yachting's top prize, the America's Cup in 2013. But Sir Russell also has multi-million-dollar property holdings spread from Whangaporawa to Queenstown. Paul Dool, $50 million, credited with being one of the first developers to spot the huge potential for inner-city apartments in Auckland. Paul Dool has certainly been involved in a fair share of them. Hamish Kennedy, $50 million. Innovation and teamwork are key ingredients behind the growth of what is one of New Zealand's most successful technology-driven companies, according to Compact Sorting Equipment's founder and managing director. And the Maber family at $50 million. It's been described as Waikato's first family of agricultural machinery, and with a 30-year history in the game, a thriving trans-Tasman enterprise and sales nudging the $400 million mark, the Maber family has certainly earned its primacy in the field. And for more on the Rich List, nbr.co.nz. To the advertising industry, Secondo Investments, the owner of Saatchi & Saatchi New Zealand, posted a 6.3% drop in billings last year, while rival advertising firm Clemenger Group reported higher commission and fee income according to their 2014 accounts. Saatchi & Saatchi's clients include Toyota, Spark, ASB Bank and DB Brewery's Tui brand. In the past calendar year, Secondo had gross billings of $117.7 million, down from $123.6 million a year earlier, its accounts show. Profit fell to about $1.4 million from $2.1, and partly reflected a 10% gain in wages and salaries to $18.6 million. Saatchi & Saatchi New Zealand Communications Director Isabel Kerr-Newell declined to comment on the earnings, other than to note the consolidated results for Secondo combined various operating entities, including the brand advisory firm Starcom. The policies of the ultimate owner, Paris-based Publicis Group SA, meant she couldn't provide a breakdown of earnings. Secondo's accounts show the company took an impairment of $16.3 million against its SSW holding subsidiary, the immediate owner of Saatchi & Saatchi New Zealand. This reduced the net carrying value to $25.7 million from about $42 million. Parent company income included about $25 million in dividends. Last week, Publicis Group, whose advertising agencies include Leo Burnett and Saatchi & Saatchi, reported a 39% gain in global sales for its second quarter. Asia-Pacific sales rose 28%. Publicis last year abandoned a $35 billion US merger with Omnicom Group that would have created the world's largest advertising firm. Clemenger, ultimately part of New York Stock Exchange-listed Omnicom Group, lifted revenue by 5.6% last year on growth in fees and commissions. Net profit climbed to $13.1 million from $12.3 the previous year and included a $1.1 million goodwill impairment. Clemenger's local business units include Radar, Clemenger BBDO, Colenso BBDO, 99 Enterprises, Proximity Wellington, and public relations firm Porter Novelli New Zealand. In answer to written questions, Clemenger New Zealand Chief Executive Jim Moses says sales growth last year was mainly driven by new business wins, including Volkswagen, Michael Hill International, Sky City Entertainment Group, Smith City, Pumpkin Patch, Avis Budget, and Mondelez. He said also contributing to our revenue growth was organic growth from Spark, Mitsubishi, New World and Pizza Hut. He says profit growth was due to strong operating performances from Touchcast, Colenso and our media assets.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant now offering Auckland's most exclusive private dining room. NBR Radio.
Friday, the 30th of July. I'm Andrew Patterson. This is NBR Radio. Of course, the release today of the 2015 NBR Rich List. And with me for some historical insights, editor Neville Gibson. So, Neville, when was it started?
Well, it started in 1986 when the National Business Review was then part of the Fairfax group in Australia, and they brought a magazine to New Zealand called Personal Investor. It wasn't published it was published for several years, and in 1990 the NBR took it over. But back in 86 we had 55 individuals and 12 families on the first list, and the youngest one was 31-year-old Craig Heatley. He came in at 120 million, so he was doing really well. This was at the height of the share market boom, Rainbow Corporation, that sort of thing. And the oldest was Sir Frank Reroff, a Wellington sharebroker. He had 85 million. The Todds were the richest family, and they topped the list at 600 million. and the total value of the rich list in 1986 was $5.3 billion, and we had a threshold of just $5 million.
There must have been quite a dramatic difference between the 86 rich list and the 87 one.
There certainly was. In fact, in the lead up to the share market crash in 87, the threshold was increased to 16 million and then again to 20 million in 1988. But the share market crash has certainly eliminated a lot of property investors, and we always ask, what is wealth? Or a lot of the wealth is really paper wealth because it's valued on the share market, and certainly with property values and that sort of thing. But only the rich were really left standing in 1988. But by 2004, the economy had really taken off again substantially. The threshold was actually raised to 50 million, and it's stayed there ever since.
Now, in the 2000s, we had the rise of the .com boom, and that ushered in a new range of rich listers.
Probably the most famous of the new rich listers was Sam Morgan with the listing of Trade Me. Up till then, a lot of these companies were virtually unheard of, operating under the radar, and there were a lot of other high-tech entrepreneurs like Peter Mayer also came in. But the Todds were still there as the wealthiest family, and 9 individuals and families continued to be on the rich list every year from the start. The likes of Sir Ron Brierley, Sir Michael Fay, David Richwhite, Michael Friedlander, they're still well up the list today. Craig Heatley, of course, is still there. Sir Patrick Hogan, the horse breeder. Bob Jones, property investor, the Pikewell family, and John Spencer, of course, who lost a lot of money in 1988 because he's one of the few people who actually paid off his debts.
Now, around 2009, we got a changing of the guard to be at the very top of the richest of the rich listers, and this was the emergence of Graham Hart.
That's right, and that was when the first billionaires started appearing on the list. When Graham Hart joined the list, by 2010 he was worth $5.5 billion. He's virtually doubled that today at $9 billion. The Todds were still there, of course, at $2.7 billion, rising today to $3.1 billion. But the interesting one was that we added a few billionaires, Kiwis, who had done really well overseas, but keeping well under the radar. There was the Chandler brothers from Hamilton. They're still there, doing very well. They split up their business. They both operate as individuals now. And Stephen Jennings, who was one of the people who made a lot of money in Russia during that time when things were really booming at that stage.
And finally, share some anecdotes, Neville, as somebody who has been watching the Rich List almost over its complete 29 years of existence. What can you share with us?
Well, there's only one or two people who ring up and say, I should be on this list. And
right. So there's not a list that people actually seek to be on.
They certainly don't. And while over the years many of them got used to it, and we contact most of them. A few are very angry about being on it and say they shouldn't be, but we usually find that they sell a business or something like that. But the one who wanted to be on it most of all was Terry Sirapisos. Now, Terry, of course, his property empire collapsed, and we had an affidavit from his accountant saying he was worth this, that and the other. But of course, unfortunately, that was published. We had to take it away from him the following year. One or two other individuals, and I won't go into the names, disappeared off the list for rather mysterious reasons. And sometimes one of them rang up and said, why have you taken me off? And that is because sometimes it's hard to work out people's wealth, or they do things to their family trust. But in one case, the divorce was in the offing, and the individual concerned didn't want that sort of money being bandied about on the rich list. In fact, he wanted to be poor for at least a year so that he didn't get into trouble, and then he remarried and subsequently got back on again.
How difficult is it? Because obviously a lot of people go to a lot of trouble to keep their wealth fairly well hidden.
Oh, yeah, well, we have a lot of individuals and families where it is quite difficult to do that, but we get the best advice, and of course rich lists are prepared around the world, usually valuing people as going concerns. It's only when there is a real change of trusts and that sort of thing, or obviously people go off the list when they die, but their wealth can live on with other people, and it's very hard to track down a lot of that sort of thing. But we haven't had any really big mistakes over the years. Putting someone on because they said they were worth this and weren't, that was one, and I'll never forget that one. But generally speaking, it's pretty accurate, and a lot of people would really take issue if we were well out. A lot of people say, well, a lot of it must be borrowed from the bank and so on, but people don't, and the banks don't even lend to rich people unless they think that is really well secured.
Finally, do you think that we should celebrate this list?
Oh, certainly. Well, I have to write a variation on that each year. The main thing I would take out of the rich list is that to get on the rich list, you either have to have wealth already and don't lose it, and that takes, that's not as easy as it sounds. Secondly, and once you're on it, you want to keep on it by managing it well. And the other is to really have to start a business, and that takes a long time. So when we say people have been under the radar for a long time, they might have been grafting away for 20 or 30 years before they finally become recognised. But they do become obvious. Once a business reaches a certain scale, they have to do certain reporting and that sort of thing. Many of them, of course, become philanthropists and, again, want to be recognised for that. So it's not so hard to recognise individuals and companies that are worth more than $50 million.
Thanks for joining us, Neville Gibson, on the day that the NBR's 2015 Rich List is published on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. Free to air online. NBR, the meeting place of intelligent business.
To hear interviews with Cameron Slater and Colin Craig, just tune in to NBR Radio or on demand on My NBR Radio. To Christchurch we go, and the Christchurch School of Music is returning to its former site beside the earthquake-damaged Cathedral of the Blessed Sacrament in Barbados Street. For 17 years, the CSM's home was in the former convent for the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions, but the building had to be pulled down after the earthquakes. Since then, the school's office has been in temporary facilities in Waltham Road. The Catholic Diocese of Christchurch, which owns the property, will lease out 1,000 square metres of land on the corner with Ferry Road and will provide 4 portable classrooms that will be used for teaching, meetings, office requirements and music and instrument storage. Celia Stewart, Music Director at the CSM, says the move will help maintain links with the neighbouring Catholic Cathedral College and Marian College, where most of the teaching takes place. It's the largest inner-city music school in Australasia, with nearly 800 students. The neighbouring secondary schools allow for capacity of 45 teaching rooms after school and on Saturdays. This year is the 60th anniversary of the CSM. Keith Beale, Property and Development Manager for the Catholic Diocese, says the CSM return fits with the diocese's long-term plans for the cathedral precinct. Market news. Bethune's Investments outgoing chairman Murray Radford will stay on the board of the auction house formerly known as Mowbray Collectibles after founder John Mowbray declared his resignation as director yesterday. Earlier this month, Mr Radford said he would resign after 15 years as a director, having signalled 12 months earlier he would be stepping down to refresh the board and deal with health issues. Today, the Wellington-based auction house said Mr Radford would stay on the board until the end of its deeply discounted rights issue, because otherwise Mr Mowbray's departure would cause a breach of NZX listing rules. The company said after considering the serious consequences for Bethunes that Mr Mowbray's decision to resign creates, Mr Radford has agreed to withdraw his own resignation as a director. Mr Radford's intention is to leave the board following the conclusion of the proposed rights issue. Bethunes changed its name after founder Mr Mowbray bought subsidiaries Mowbray Bethunes and Wildlife Philatelic for $950,000, leaving the company with Auction House Web Galleries as its sole trading entity. The auction house has been something of a disappointment for the struggling antiques business. Since it took full control of the auction house last year, it's underperformed forecasts presented during the valuation, forcing the company to concede in November that the purchase price of the 51% was too high. On Monday, the company announced it was looking to raise between 1.5 and 2.87 million via a 15-1 renounceable rights offer priced at 1.5 cents per share, which at the time represented a 93% discount to its 20-cent share price. The share price has since tumbled some 60% and last traded at 8 cents, according to NZX data. The directors want a new investor because Mr Mowbray, who owns 40% of the stock, said he won't take part in the rights issue. The company will use the cash injection to help keep Webb's auction, which is carrying $1.15 million in term debt and working capital overdraft, afloat. The company said on Monday Bethune simply has too great a debt burden for a small company, particularly given the volatility that Webbs is currently experiencing in the auction market, coupled with the sizable business interruption from moving premises, which has impacted the number of auctions held calendar to date. Bethune's needs to address Webb's debt burden to provide time and breathing space if it wishes to maximise value for Webbs in the future or pursue other options, such as a sale of Webbs. Annual losses widened to $2.95 million in the year ended March 31st from a loss of $112,000 a year earlier, while sales rose 39% to $2.3 million. Christopher Swasbrook is set to act as chairman until a replacement for Mr Radford is found. To market analysis. Analysts lifted their forecasts and target price for aged care provider Arvida Group after it completed an opportunistic acquisition of 3 Auckland villages. Earlier this month, Arvida bought facilities in Epsom, Browns Bay and Albany from the Aria Retirement Villages Group for $62 million, a 7.5% discount to the portfolio's market value. This is the aged care provider's first acquisition since wrapping up 17 providers into one group and listing on the stock market last December, and came ahead of its acquisition forecasts. Forsyth Barr, which has an outperform rating on the stock, has boosted Arvida's target price from $109 to $114 on the back of the acquisitions, and lifted earnings per share forecasts by 9% in 2016 and 17% in 2017. The analysts were forecasting 2016 underlying profit of $13.1 million in line with the IPO prospectus, but have increased this 27% to $16.6 million. While Arvida took advantage of a good deal with the latest acquisition, Forsyth Barr expects its focus to return to integrating its portfolio and leveraging existing brownfield opportunities to establish its track record in the listed market. Arvida differs from its listed peers by having a heavy weighting to care, with 1,239 aged care beds and 896 independent living units and serviced apartments. Villages with care provide a resilient earnings base backed by government funding and older residents, but Arvida will not have the same development margins as its listed competitors. But Forsyth Barr analyst Jeremy Simpson says in a research note this means it will be more resilient if there is a downturn in the residential housing market. He says given Arvida is a new and relatively small listed company, it may take time for it to lift its profile. Relative to its listed peers, Arvida has an attractive dividend and compares very favourably on both price-to-book ratio and earnings multiples. Arvida's share price is currently 88 cents, which is below the 95-cent IPO price, but more than the 82-cent low it fell to last week after investors adjusted to news about the share purchase plan, which closed oversubscribed and raised $5 million.
NBR Radio. With Hotel de Brett, your home away from home, but with better service. NBR Radio.
Market news. New Zealand Oil and Gas says exploration drilling of the Brach prospect in the Canterbury Basin, which has the potential to be the nation's biggest ever hydrocarbon discovery, is expected to start in 2017, subject to securing suitable partners and a drilling rig. The Wellington-based oil and gas company has a 50-50 joint venture partner in the prospect with Beach Energy. Analysis of seismic data acquired in 2013 suggests an estimated prospective resource of 530 million barrels of oil equivalent, or MMBOE. It says the chances of success for a discovery and subsequent development are yet to be fully assessed, but typically fall within the range of 10 to 20%. It said seismic data has resolved 3 prospective formations, one previously unidentified, which combined have the potential to be the biggest hydrocarbon discovery in New Zealand to date. NZOG's share would be 265 MMBOE based on its half share. The Bark prospect, a large Cretaceous structural trap of approximately 150 square kilometres, lies in about 800 metres of water and is about 60 kilometres offshore. The target formations are between 2,500 and 3,000 metres below mean sea level. BP drilled the nearby Galleon structure in 1985 and demonstrates the presence of a rich gas condensate through multiple well tests. Drilling in the adjacent Caravel prospect in early 2014 by US oil and gas company Anadarko found oil and gas shows but not in commercial quantities. Anadarko is considering further seismic work. Prior to that drilling, there had been 6 test wells drilled since the 1970s on the Caravel, Carrick, Endeavour, Resolution and Bark prospects, all off the Otago-Canterbury coastline without success, according to the New Zealand Resources website. NZOG said it's in talks with potential farm partners with experience in operating exploration and development activities in such environments. The company's been building its portfolio of potential reserves to add to productive fields such as Tui and Kupe. Earlier this year, NZOG secured control of the board of Q Energy Resources after securing 48% of the ASX-listed energy company, and has subsequently appointed 3 directors and requisitioned a shareholders' meeting to remove 2 former Q directors. NZOG's cash flow statement for the quarter ended June 30 shows cash at the end of the quarter of $83.5 million, up from $43 million 3 months earlier. That mainly reflected Q being consolidated into the group as at April 1. NZOG shares rose 2% to 50 cents on the NZX today. To Christchurch, the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority has agreed to a new payout formula for members of the group dubbed Quake Outcasts. The Quake Outcasts comprises a group of property owners whose commercial, vacant and therefore uninsurable and uninsured homes were red zoned by the government. One of the arguments of the group was that the government's red zoning caused their loss. Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority Minister Jerry Brownlee initially justified the refusal for full payment on the grounds of moral hazard, that compensating uninsured property owners would be wrong. The group took their case as far as the Supreme Court, which ordered the government to reconsider the offers. Mr Brownlee made another lowball offer and threw the matter open to a public submission process. As a result of overwhelming submissions, the offer to uninsured property owners for their land is the same as that for vacant and insured commercial property owners. The earlier offer to section owners had been for 50% of land value. So, the new offers outlined in the recovery plan are: for vacant properties, sections with no buildings, a new Crown offer at 100% of the 2007 and 8 rateable land value. For insured commercial properties, a new Crown offer at 100% of the 2007-8 rateable land value and 100% of the 2007-8 rateable improvements value for the insured improvements such as buildings. Property owners may choose not to accept any payment for the improvements and keep the benefits of their insurance claims. For uninsured properties, a new Crown offer at 100% of the 2007 and 8 rateable land value. No payment will be made for uninsured improvements or buildings. Property owners may choose to relocate, salvage or sell any uninsured improvements, or they could elect for the Crown to remove the improvements with the Crown meeting the cost. Owners who accepted an earlier Crown offer will be eligible for a top-up to bring it in line with the new offer. The potential total cost of the new offers, assuming all eligible property owners accept the offer or top-up, is $58.6 million. To China, gyrations in China's share market appear to have faded for the meantime as more government buying support emerged. A 3-day slide ended yesterday again with sharp gains in the last half hour of trading. The Shanghai Composite finished 3.4% up after trading swung between gains and losses. The smaller Shenzhen Composite rose 4.1%. The gains, which ranged across all sectors, offset an 11% drop over 3 days starting last Friday. But the market is still down more than a quarter from its June high. About 400 stocks listed in Shanghai and Shenzhen reached their 10% upward daily limit. The late surge was attributed to buying on behalf of a government agency that is pledged to support the market at times of volatility. On Tuesday, the main share market index moved in a 6% band before ending with a 1.7% loss. On Monday, it dropped 8.5%, the biggest daily fall in more than 8 years, as investors panicked and government buying support appeared absent.
NBR Radio. Free to air online with business news you can use.
In aviation news, Jetstar, the low-cost offshoot of Australian-owned Qantas Airways, will add a 6th domestic route with a new Wellington-Dunedin schedule and bolster its Trans-Tasman flights as it looks to win passengers from dominant rival Air New Zealand. The Wellington-Dunedin route will begin in October and see the airline fly between the capital and Otago's largest city 3 times a week. It will also add capacity to its Trans-Tasman routes over the Christmas period with extra Christchurch and Queenstown flights from Australia and Monday services between Auckland, Melbourne and Sydney. In June, the Discount Airline said it planned to expand into at least 4 regional destinations still to be determined from flying the main trunk routes. It's likely to cherry-pick the most profitable deals with local airport companies. Last November, Air New Zealand announced it would abandon 7 regional routes, saying they were costing the company up to $1 million a month, in favour of boosting capacity to other regional airports by buying 13 aircraft for $300 million. That led to consumer backlash as it ended operating services to 3 of its smaller unprofitable destinations, Kaitaia, Whakatane and Westport from April. Jetstar has said it has no plans to fly those routes either. Domestic routes between the major cities such as Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch are often discounted, but the New Zealand Airports Association says regions are right to question whether provincial routes are generating excessive profits. In August, the association called on the Commerce Commission to regulate the airline's regional fares, where the national carrier has an effective monopoly, after it announced a 45% uplift in annual profit to $262 million, its third consecutive year of earnings growth. Air New Zealand shares fell 0.4% to 264, having touched a 7-month low earlier in the month when Jetstar first announced its domestic route plans. To the courts, the Supreme Court has dismissed an appeal application in the multimillionaire Goff family's highly publicised power squabble, which could have ousted a family member from the board. The $350 million rich list family's dispute revolves around the interests of the grandchildren of Christchurch-based equipment and machinery supplier Goff Group founder Tracy Thomas Goff. Mr. Goff had 2 marriages and grandchildren from both who sought control of the board of the Goff Group. The grandchildren from his first marriage include Tracy, Harcourt, Anthony and Avenel, while Ben Goff and Gina Satterthwaite are from the second marriage. The first group had sought to unseat Executive Director Ben from the board, but earlier this year the Court of Appeal upheld his and his sister's challenge to a High Court decision. Yesterday, the Supreme Court dismissed an application brought by Tracy, Harcourt, Anthony and Avenel for leave to appeal the Court of Appeal's decision. The issue proposed for appeal was over the interpretation of a clause in the company's constitution and whether a term "no person shall be appointed a director" referred to just the initial appointment or in a continuous sense. This is of significance for 2 directors, the founder's great-grandson Jamie, as well as Ben, who is Deputy Chairman and General Manager of Strategic Development. The 2 each represent one branch of the family, but Ben is also a full-time employee. Anthony Goff's side says if the clause refers only to the initial act of appointment, then a family director, who is also a full-time employee, could potentially remain in office indefinitely without unanimous agreement of all the company's shareholders. They say this is a matter for appeal of general commercial significance. But the Supreme Court's decision says the clause is tailored to the unusual situation of this particular company and its shareholders. The decision says we do not consider that the proposed appeal raises any issues of general or public importance or general commercial significance. The application was dismissed and the applicants ordered to pay costs of $2,500 to the respondents. And if you want to read the full judgment, nbr.co.nz.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform, www.nbrtalent.co.nz.